Okay, let's open a word of prayer. Lord, thanks so much for the day. We pray that you will bless our time together today, and pray that whatever technical issues we are having this morning will be healed quickly. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I'm having a lot of trouble today. I usually have all my notes, and I cannot see any of my notes. I'm completely flying blind today, and it's extremely frustrating, to say the least. So, and then I'm logged out of all my things that I would use to look at separately. So enough of my problems, right? The world's falling apart. So this will be a little bit strange because I'm going to have to go from memory on some of the things that I've read that I wanted to share with you. As I said, I have a note view that I can see, but today it's just disappeared. So all I see is what you see. So I'm not sure why this is happening. Of course, these things have never happened before. So let's look at a few things, and we talk about these things each week: acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding. There are a lot of things happening very quickly. And again, I will cite the verse that we use all the time in Daniel chapter 12, that as we get closer to the end, we're going to have a better understanding of the things that happen. And there are a lot of different Bible prophecy passages at play. So I don't go through and share those Bible prophecy passages with you each week, but understand that all the things that I look at you with, the turbulence in society, breakdown in culture, breakdown in the church, things revolving around Israel, the Middle East, wars, rumors of wars, those things that Jesus talked about in Matthew chapter 24, and that Daniel talks about in Daniel chapter 7 through 12, those are all the things that inform me. So I don't go through those passages every week just because we're here long enough as it is. But one of the interesting things this week is that everybody is, I look at secular press, I look at secular publications. I have one here. Usually I would put this into a slide. It's Foreign Policy Magazine, and it talks about the year the world votes. And this is a big deal. I'll talk some about the U.S. elections and some of the things going on there, just because I think what you're going to see worldwide is you're going to see a bunch of conflict in elections. And about half of the world has national elections this year. It's pretty unusual. About half the world's population, about half the world's GDP are electing leaders at the national level. You may be surprised, but I think that the election in the United States is going to be rather chaotic. And we'll talk about that. But the other thing that everybody's talking about is war. So as I look through the news, I watch videos, I listen to other commentators, people that I don't agree with on much, but I want to get their perspective. And everybody's talking about this year looks to be a year of war. There are major conflicts all over the place, particularly in the Middle East. But we have Russia, Ukraine. We have problems in the Balkans right now, Kosovo, Serbia. You have a problem that we don't really even talk about that much. A little bit there to the north of Iran is Azerbaijan and Armenia. They're not getting along. They're supposedly working on a peace plan, but there's been at a minimum, an ethnic cleansing of a section that Armenia has held on to for a long time, but Azerbaijan wants it. And it creates a lot of very strange alliances in the world. For example, Israel has always relied on Azerbaijan as a far off or a forward base for maybe attacks that it might make on Iran. But then again, the there's a large ethnic population in Azerbaijan called the Azeris. The Azeris are, I think, about 30%. That ethnic group constitutes about 30% of the Iranian population. I believe the wife of the Ayatollah Khomeini is Azeri. So you have Israel sort of supporting Azerbaijan, and then you have Iran maybe supporting Azerbaijan, or at least part of it, trying to protect it. And then Turkey gets involved because they hate the Armenians. And everywhere you look, there are counter narratives. So, for example, it's clear that Turkey engaged in a genocide of Armenians back during World War I at the end of the Ottoman Empire. Maybe 1 or 2 million killed. By the way, I don't know if you've noticed down the road here, the guy who's got the big estate that he built, local businessman, it's called Armenian Estates. And it's interesting, I think it's the pool house between these two. I think they're 12 or 13,000 square foot mansions that he's built. And the pool house in between, Armenia is a Christian country, largely Christian, but he picked like the only pagan temple in the country he built like a replica of it on his property down the road here. So that's kind of strange, but so that's a conflict that we don't really talk about that much. And I have a friend who's her husband is Armenian, and she's sort of in disbelief that this subject is not covered because it's just not, to the world, it's just not that big a deal. In Nigeria, there were hundreds of Christians slaughtered in the last few weeks by Muslim extremists. There's tribal conflicts everywhere. It's just, so everything is just kind of unbelievable. And the secular world picks up on it. So I'm going to play a clip of Brett Weinstein on Tucker Carlson the other day. Now, Brett Weinstein is an evolutionary biologist. He's an atheist. And I think would consider himself a man of the left, or at least a man who is liberal, in the sense that you would consider Alan Dershowitz to be liberal, not a crazy leftist. You can reason with Alan Dershowitz on a lot of issues. He comes to the wrong conclusion, but at least you can talk to him about it. But so Brett, if you might remember a few years ago, there was a professor at Evergreen State University out in Washington or Oregon that was attacked by radical leftists on the campus, even though he himself was a leftist, because he wasn't giving heed to their grievances. Well, that was Brett Weinstein. I also want to say, too, I'm concerned with some of the direction that I see Tucker Carlson going. So playing a clip from his program is not an endorsement of everything that Tucker Carlson does. But I found this clip to be interesting in the context of what we talk about in Bible prophecy. So here's Brett Weinstein talking about what he sees coming in 2024.
Let's just put it this way. We have a large global population. Most people have no useful role through no fault of their own. They have not been given an opportunity in life to find a useful way to contribute. And I wonder if the rent-seeking elites that have hoarded so much power are not unhooking our rights because effectively they're afraid of some global French Revolution moment as people realize that they've been betrayed and left without good options. Is that what we're seeing? Certainly feels like we're facing an end game where important properties that would once have been preserved by all parties because they might need them one day are now being dispensed with, and we're being, we're watching our governmental structures and every one of our institutions captured, hollowed out, turned into a paradoxical inversion of what it was designed to do. It's not an accident. Whether they, the thing that worries me most actually is that whatever is driving this is not composed of diabolical geniuses who at least have some plan for the future, but it's being driven by people who actually do not know what kind of hell they are inviting. Yes, they're going to create a kind of chaos from which humanity may well not emerge. And I get the sense that unless they have some remarkable plan that is not obvious, that they are just simply drunk with power and putting everyone, including themselves, in tremendous jeopardy by taking apart the structures on which we depend.
Well, that's interesting, the way he says that, because this is an atheist, a man of the left, and he's very, I don't know if you gathered this from what he said, he's rather pessimistic about where things are going in the world. This is interesting that you happen. Now, I was going to go into 1 Kings chapter 22 a little bit with the story of Ahab. You might remember the story of Ahab. He wants to go up against an opposing king, and he consults with his prophets. He has 400 prophets. And in that, I'll just sort of relate to you what happens in 1 Kings chapter 22. So he calls the prophets in, and they say, yes, go up, you'll have a great victory, king, O king. And he doesn't really believe them, so he calls in a prophet named Micaiah. And he says, yeah, I'm going to bring in Micaiah because he hates me. He never gives me good news. He's always, which you'll find is he's always telling him the truth. So Micaiah kind of mocks him when he first comes in. But it's clear from the context of the passage, first of all, there are 400 false prophets, and there's one true prophet of God. And that's a pretty good rule of thumb, that when you're looking for people who speak prophetically, 400 false prophets to one true prophet is a pretty good ratio. That's sort of a minimum ratio of what you should expect. And Micaiah just says, at first he mocks him and says, oh yeah, you'll have a great victory. And he says, come on, what happened? And so what we find there, though, is Micaiah tells him, you're gonna lose. And Ahab doesn't believe him and goes ahead and does it anyway, doesn't take his advice. But it's clear from the context of the passage, and what the passage says is that the prophets, the false prophets, are being driven by an evil spirit. And it sort of brings to life what we see in the New Testament in Ephesians chapter 6, where it says, principalities and powers. We wrestle not with flesh and blood, but with principalities and powers. So these powers are out there. One of the best examples of them is the passage in Daniel where it talks about the angel comes to Daniel and says, I heard your prayer, and for 3 weeks I've been trying to get you, but I was resisted by the prince of Persia, a demonic entity that's very powerful. So there is a war in the heavenlies, and I think what you're going to see in the days, weeks, months ahead is that war is going to manifest itself on the earth. The spiritual battle is going to manifest itself in in physical things here on the earth. And eventually we know that at the time of the abomination of desolation, there's a lot of things going on in that particular time. Jesus talks about it in Matthew chapter 24. Daniel talks about it a lot in Daniel chapter 11. And when that event takes place, and I think it's a real event, Paul references it in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. So it's going to happen in a real place in Jerusalem, but it's also going to coincide with Satan being cast out of heaven. And when that happens, literally all hell, and my view is he will possess the son of perdition, the Antichrist, and literally all hell will really break loose on the earth. And that's when Jesus says that is the time that is unlike any other in human history, which never was nor ever shall be. So that's like the really bad time, a period of great tribulation when all of those things happen. And it's interesting as we see this fold. I did a little talk with Tom Hughes on Hope for Our Times the other day. You can get it at hopeforourtimes.com and on their YouTube channel and their app. But one of the things, I saw someone who said this, someone who I've listened to, I'm not going to identify the person because I don't want to deal with all the negative comments because there are people who might not like him. I found his insight to be correct at sometimes. And he made this statement in a talk I heard him give. He said, prophecy will be fulfilled as it is written, not as it is interpreted. And I think that's very interesting. We have the written word, but I participate in a lot of forums. I read a lot of different forums about Bible prophecy, a lot of comments about people, and everybody's sure that they have it right, but nobody agrees with anybody else. So I think that if there's one thing that I would hope is that we could inject a little bit of humbleness into the Bible prophecy teaching community among those that are actually doing what I think God wants them to do and teaching Bible prophecy. So I usually am able to fast forward. Oh, there it is. Okay. This thing is all messed up. So we're going to talk a bit today about Israel. And I want you to kind of keep in mind these maps. This is a graphic that I found. I think this is a fantastic view that gives you a concept of the lay of the land of Israel. You see the Sea of Galilee in the north. Understand the Sea of Galilee is about, and I'm going to get this wrong, it's 600, 800, the surface of the Sea of Galilee is 600 or 800 feet below sea level. So when you're going to the Sea of Galilee, you go down the side of a mountain, and you eventually get to this place that says you've now reached sea level, and the Sea of Galilee is way below you, like 50 stories, 60, 70, 80 stories height below you. And of course, the Dead Sea is the lowest place on earth, 1,320 feet below sea level. It keeps shrinking, by the way. But what you see is you see the Jordan Valley. So that whole valley from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea is below sea level. But then there are these mountains that rise up, some to 3,900 feet. That's the area that the secular world calls the West Bank. Biblical people would call that Judea and Samaria. So you see here, the West Bank, there's Judea in the south and Samaria in the north, and then the Golan Heights, and then that goes up to Mount Hermon, which is about 10,000 feet above sea level. So the area that I use scare quotes, Palestinians occupy largely is this area of Judea and Samaria. It's the watershed for Israel, and water is a big problem in the Middle East. Now, Israel has some advantages. They have discovered a lot of gas off of their coast, and they're able to power with that desalination plants, which consume a lot of electricity to make fresh water. And then Israel has used special systems to catch excess water, rainwater, and that sort of thing. Much better, like if we did that in California, California wouldn't be in this problem all the time, but we just we just need to let all that water run to the ocean. We don't have any way of catching it and using it. Israel does. They lead the world in that technology. But they have the gas to power the desalination plants, but they still need rain, and that largely falls in the mountains there of Judea and Samaria, which is why that's just one additional factor why this ridiculous notion that there will be a two-state solution is just never going to happen. But everybody's talking about the two-state solution. We have a candidate running for president, trying to run for president. People are trying to keep him from running for president, Trump, who came out with this plan in January of 2020. And the day this plan came out, literally all hell broke loose with regard to Charlie Vector 019 in the United States. The day this plan came out, you can go find talks with Bill Koenig. Bill does a good job of unpacking that. I think they're directly connected. So in that plan, there are two conceptual maps. One is the State of Israel map, and it's in the brown. The Palestinian areas are in the green. And then there's a conceptual map for this. Did I put them both in the my best laid plans? So they're both in there, but it looks the same. It just says State of Palestine. So understand that the Trump proposal, if it had been accepted, everybody knows it wasn't going to be accepted, but the proposal was to divide the land of Israel. That is problematic to me. And I know people don't like to say that. Now, here is what I did was I took that overlay and I put it on sort of a three-dimensional turn map a little bit. So you can see how that works. And there's a lot of talk about we're going to have a two-state solution. That everybody is being driven by that. But understand there is already a two-state solution. There's Israel and Jordan. That was the original two-state solution. That got off track. In fact, the green areas largely, there was a little bit more than that, went all the way down to the Jordan River, were occupied from 1948 after the 1948 War of Independence between Israel and the neighboring states. Jordan controlled that area, they called the West Bank, because it's on the west bank of the Jordan River, from 1948 to 1967. And Egypt had Gaza, by and large. Well, 67 war, Israel got all that plus the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights. And now everybody wants a two-state solution along the lines that they wanted, that they want. And this, I do not see how this situation resolves itself. That's kind of an interesting feeling, I think, that does tie into Bible prophecy, because I believe someone will come along who will say, I have the solution. Now, right now with the war that's going on, I don't understand how it happens. This is a concept that a number of Christians teach, and this is called Greater Israel. You can see it goes from the Nile River to the Euphrates. Some people think that before Ezekiel 38 war and that type of happens, Israel's going to have a great victory and they're going to take over all that land. And they're going to be residing at peace. And I think that maybe it will work out that way. But I will confess to you, I do not see how it happens right now with what's going on. I do not see, can you imagine if Israel wasn't just fighting in little tiny Gaza right here, an insignificant amount of that land, and they were trying to take over all of that area, how would the world react? Now, somebody could come along and say, listen, Israel, you do it, I'll protect you, everything's fine, I'll guarantee your peace. That could happen. I just don't see any guy like that on the world stage right now. But they could rise up very, very quickly, and things could change. But there's also a passage in Ezekiel 38:39 talks about Israel living in peace without wall, bar, or gate. Right now, do you see Israel living in that kind of state in their own land with no walls, no fences, no gates? I personally do not see it. So I'll be watching to see what happens and how this unfolds, and maybe it'll unfold a little bit different than the way we've thought it would unfold. The other thing you're going to see is you're going to see propaganda everywhere. So here's a guy, this is a guy who ran for the Senate in Utah, and he is horribly anti-Semitic. I mean, hates Jews. My feed on Twitter is full of these people. Now, I don't know if it's because I've stopped and read a few of them that the geniuses at Twitter think, oh, you want to read more of that stuff. I really don't, but finally one of them disappeared. I don't know if he got banned from Twitter. He was just awful. So what he says is, okay, look, we have the Encyclopedia Britannica from 1911, and it shows, see what it says, you can see it there on the left, Palestine. And then on the right, they have this National Geographic map from December 1947. They see it sees Palestine. So there really was a state of Palestine. And I can only say that people who propagate that, they don't read what's written, and they're intellectually challenged on an epic scale. So, so look at this. So this is what he put up and look at what he did. He put this up on October 8th. The attacks happened on October 7th. So the next day, this creep felt that it was okay to say, Israel has no right to the land. They shouldn't be there. It's all their fault. And everything that Hamas did was justified and understandable. And go read his tweets. But you want to take a shower or bath afterwards. So here's the Encyclopedia Britannica, and you can see there's a map of what's called Palestine. And so there, you'll see it here. This is it as it comes up. But it's talking about this division of the Ottoman Empire. This is at the end of the Ottoman Empire. And it was, by the way, it was the Jews in the land at that time that called themselves Palestinians, not the other way around, not the Arabs. And remember, just 50 years before this, Mark Twain had gone to the Holy Land. He said, this thing is a wasteland. There's nobody here. But there were always Jews there, and there were Arabs. There's no doubt about that. So you can see that there's the Dead Sea going all the way down to the southern part. So that's in the Encyclopedia Britannica. And this is what it says. Palestine, a geographical name of rather loose application. Etymological strictness would require it to denote exclusively the narrow strip of coastland once occupied the Philistines, from whose name it is derived. And then it says, it is, however, conventionally used as a name for the territory which in the Old Testament is claimed as the inheritance of the pre-exilic Hebrews. Thus it may be said generally to denote the southern third of the province of Syria. However, the Hebrews themselves, by the way, somebody asked me this question this week, when did the word Hebrews come about? Well, it's in the Old Testament. And remember, there are those things that I refer to. Somebody sent me actual physical samples. So Pam, if you come down to my office, those aren't rocks. Those are Mana letters. Remember that we wanted to see at the British Museum in London? And on there, they talk about that it's a letter from the king of Shechem to the Pharaoh in Egypt saying, hey, this is written, they were done, they're in cuneiform. And they would fit in the palm of your hand. They look bigger when you look at a picture of them, but they're letters. I mean, you don't make a clay letter that you got to lug around. You know, they were concerned about postal rates even back in the late Bronze period of human history. And he says, listen, we've got a problem with these Haparu people. They're overrunning the land. Help, help, help. That's a paraphrase. Well, Haparu Hebrew is not too much of a stretch. And so people Joel Kramer will tell you that those were referring to the Hebrew people who were coming in at the time of the conquest and I think the late Bronze period. So the Hebrews themselves have preserved in the proverbial expression from Dan to Beersheba an indication of the normal north and south limits of their land, and in defining the area of the country under discussion, it is this indication which is generally followed. That's Encyclopedia Britannica. The modern subdivisions under the jurisdiction of the Ottoman Empire are no sense coterminous with those of an antiquity, and hence do not afford a boundary by which Palestine can be separated exactly from the rest of Syria in the north, or the Sinaitic and Arabian deserts in the south and east. So listen, So when this guy, this anti-Semitic, Jew-hating guy posts and says, see, it's Palestine, he didn't know what he's talking about. He obviously hasn't read the Encyclopedia Britannica text. He sees a map and it has the name Palestine on it, and he thinks, well, that supports my view. This is a problem in the world today. Everybody pulls stuff out and says, see, that supports my view, when maybe it doesn't really if you look into it a little bit. So that's the other one. And then in the National Geographic magazine, they have this letter, December 1947. See, there's an archaeologist looks at Palestine with a map, Arab land beyond the Jordan. But look at what it says up here. The majority, this map is based on a new entity that exists in the world called the United Nations, 1947. The majority report of the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine recommended that Palestine be divided into an Arab state, shown in dark gray, and a Jewish state, shown in light gray. So you can see how they proposed dividing it. But that was contrary to what, by the way, the San Remo Conference had decided many years before. This lady, Israel supporter, who said, so she went back and she looked at how there's studies that have been done about how the usage of the term Palestinian is in literature, newspapers, other literature. And what you see is that it's not used that much until 1960, and then it just spikes. Well, what happened in 1960? Well, in 1964, they created a thing called the Palestinian Liberation Organization that was done with the support of the Russian KGB to cause, as they were prone to do, to cause chaos. And so you can see in Google books and search that the use of the term Palestinian really spiked. This is from today's London Times, talking about what's going on in the world. One wrong move in a game of 3D chess descends into all-out war. Let's look at some of the things that they talk about. One of the things they talk about, there's a tremendous amount of pressure on Bibi Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu. A lot of people think he won't survive this, but I heard other people today said he probably will come out of this okay at the end. So what that ought to tell you is you really can't make a conclusion right now. We'll have to see how this plays out. He's trying to get things put off on an inquiry into what happened on 10/7 until after the war. And there's a big push to do it now. We'll talk about that in just a moment. So there's a lot of internal back and forth with his war cabinet. They're, in some respects, not getting along. What are they going to do with Gaza when they're done? Are they going to go after Hezbollah in the north when they're done? What are they going to do with the West Bank? Those are three major fronts that they've got to deal with that are causing problems. And so into the midst of all this, and I will say this, I have people who I respect tremendously who disagree with me on this. But the Supreme Court of Israel, in an 8-7 decision, although it was 12-5 or 12-3 on some issues, in a very narrowly divided issue, the whole Israeli Supreme Court came out and said that the judicial reform law that had been enacted by the democratically elected and composed Knesset was not reasonable. And so it violated what had been created 30 years ago by a justice of the Israeli Supreme Court, a leftist, that this reasonableness standard. And so the thing is that this reasonableness standard, it gives them the opportunity to strike down any law that they just don't like. Now, to me, you can argue the merits of that, whether that law should have been enacted. That's fine. But this is, in my view, this is judicial tyranny. These are judges who are overstepping their bounds And then they do it in this, and look at, by preventing you from enacting a law, we are supporting democracy. This is going to come to the United States. It's already in the United States. So, by the way, a couple of the justices retired just before October 7th. But the way their court is structured, if you're a retiring justice, even though you've retired, like really retired, you're allowed to sit on cases and help vote on the decision if you do it within 2 or 3 months of your retirement. Amazingly, this Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who was retiring, she voted. And of course, she voted to overturn the law, which everybody expected her to do. So it was a closely divided court, but not, if you look into the details, maybe not as closely divided. I personally do not think this is a good thing. I understand that this has ripped Israeli society apart. It just seems to me that in the midst of a war, issuing this decision, but she had to, if she was going to participate in the decision, it had to be issued now. But, she could have stepped back and said, well, I think that it would be best for the next court composition to decide it, or how the court is constituted without my vote. That's just my assessment of it. I don't know her. I just know her to be a rather obnoxious leftist. Now, other people say, well, she's the only thing preventing us from Israel becoming this crazy Orthodox, Zionist, religious state. The problem is Israel does not have a constitution, and that's the ultimate problem. So what I think the solution should have been is you got to sit down and hammer this out with all the parties, because the way it's constituted now is minority parties have an outsized influence. That's always been the case. But Israel is increasingly moving to the right. And in some respects, this may be sort of the last gasp at the left sort of controlling things the way they've had it for decades since the founding, well, really since the founding of the State of Israel. Now, I will admit, this is a very offensive cartoon to some people. This appeared in a religious Zionist publication. This is Hayut, the Chief Justice, retired Chief Justice, sort of like, see, I've made the decision. And it was very offensive to a lot of people in Israel. So I will acknowledge that. But nevertheless, that's what it is. So that's just a division in Israeli society. In the Middle East, I'm going to focus mostly on that. Then we'll talk a little bit about our elections before we get out of here. There is a conflict going on between Egypt and Ethiopia. Whether this erupts into war, I do not know. Ethiopia has built this thing called the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD, which if you have GERD, you know that gives you heartburn. And it's giving Egypt a lot of heartburn. And Egypt goes, how dare you dam up the Nile and take water away from us? And the Ethiopia says, listen, we live in a desert. Nothing grows here. We got to have water, and we're going to try to responsibly do this. Egypt says, well, you're causing the flow of the Nile to be reduced. Well, you have this giant dam in Aswan that you can release water from Egypt, right? And there may be a prophecy in Ezekiel or Isaiah about this Tower of Siloam that may be reference to the Aswan Dam. So there's going to be, I think there's something coming with regard to this. So put a bookmark in this and see how it goes. But this could lead to war. And Egypt's in big trouble. One of the reasons is they're in trouble is because of Yemen here on the south of the Arabian Peninsula is shutting down shipping traffic. Egypt relies on the Suez Canal for about 20% of its government revenues, the money that they earn. It's about $9 billion a year. It's a poor country. It's, depending on how you calculate it, 15, 20, 25% of world trade passes through the Suez Canal. And a lot of the ships, for example, this shipping line, and by the way, Jordan also relies a lot on the trade that comes up through the Red Sea, not through the Suez Canal, but up through the Gulf of Aqaba to Eilat and the city of Aqaba, the Jordanian city of Aqaba. That's where Jordan gets a lot of its things because it's, other than that, it's landlocked. So the Houthis, Shiite Houthis, are hurting the Sunni Jordanian Hashemite kingdom, which, by the way, consists about 3/4 of the kingdom consist of Palestinian refugees, using that word in the scare quotes. And Egypt is having its trade shut down, but nobody seems to be helping. The United States came out and said, hey, we're going to make this coalition and we're going to fight the Houthis. Well, nobody's really joining it from that area. Some people wonder, like, well, why isn't Saudi Arabia stepping in? Because they rely on that. Well, Saudi Arabia is selling oil to China. Iran's selling oil to China. It's really Europe that's going to be hurt in the long run, and Egypt. And I personally think that, I heard somebody suggest this, and I think it was a well thought out comment, that Saudi Arabia is holding back to see if Egypt gets involved. Hey, Egypt, defend yourself. You know, it's your ships. And the Saudis have a lot of money, the richest family in the world. They can get these super tankers and go other directions. They don't have to use the Suez Canal because they have the capital to do that. So we'll see that this could turn into something more. There's been attacks on ships. This is a container ship from the Maersk line. They've said they're not going to use that. I did look at the marine tracker. The green are container ships. The red are tankers. And this was just a snapshot that I took of tankers in operation, the tankers and cargo ships in operation the other day. And what it shows is that most of the world trade moves by water. It's slower, but it's cheap. But the problem is, you can see there are still ships going up through the Red Sea as of the other day, but there's a lot of ships going down around the Horn of Africa, and that adds like 10,000, 11,000 miles to the journey in up to 3 weeks. That increases the cost of shipping by 40 or 50% over what it would be if they'd gone through the Suez Canal. Now, China's trying to control things. They're trying to build railways through Kazakhstan and Russia and Iran. And then there was this Middle East at the G20 meeting. They talked about a India, Middle East, Europe corridor. And that would go on railways through Saudi Arabia, across Jordan, trucks and that type of thing, to ports in Israel, and then on to Europe. And there's also a lot of talk, I've talked about this way too much, but there's also this theory that the reason Israel's doing this war so they can get control of Gaza to build a thing called the Ben Gurion Canal. But I just do not see that as a very viable, that my own view is that that's not a very viable option. It's a mountainous region. A lot would be down here to the right. They would have to come up through a pass, make a couple curves, and then the plan is to exit north of Gaza, not through Gaza. That always was the plan. But that canal is going to cost $50 to $100 billion to build. It's going to take years. And when it was proposed 60 years ago, they said, well, we'll make a sea level canal from Eilat to the Mediterranean, and we'll just use nuclear weapons to blow the sea level holes to make a sea level canal. Well, now, can you imagine that being done in today's world? But they're going to be underground nuclear blasts. I mean, you think there's protests against Israel for attacking Palestine or the Gazans, according to their narrative? What do you think if they start shooting off nuclear weapons, even underground? I personally don't see that it's a viable alternative, but I've been wrong before. By the way, this continues to be a concern of mine. So this, to the left here is Shanghai, the port of Shanghai. But you see all those gray dots? Now, I've had people really push back on me on this, but I stand by what I said is those gray dots, people say, well, they're just fishing vessels, but not all fishing vessels turn transponders on. These are ships that had transponders on and then shut them off. And it appears to me that these are a lot of cargo ships that are just parked out there off the coast of China because world trade is down. It's not as bad as it was, but you can see just in that area, and if you look off South Korea and Japan, you'll see the same thing. There are a lot of these gray dots on marinetracker.com. And it just says, if you hover over a dot, it just says transponder lost, sent a signal this last time. It doesn't tell you what the ship is. If you hover over a green or a red dot, it will tell you the ship, show you a picture of the ship, its capacity, all that type of thing. It's amazing the things that you can find out in this world. But this came up at the UN Security Council, the shipping lane. This is Ambassador Erdan from Israel speaking at the Security Council, I think on Thursday.
Mr. President, the Houthis' attacks on maritime trade are not merely an escalation, nor are they a spillover. It did not happen magically by itself. This reality is a glimpse into the dark future of the region and the entire globe if action is not taken. This is just the beginning of a chaotic Middle East that will drag the rest of the world into chaos. Distinguished Council members, as we speak, the Middle East is on fire. For years, all moderate countries in the region have faced the growing threat of radical terrorists. Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad have been attempting to tighten a noose of terror around Israel's borders. Shiite terror groups in Iraq have been firing drones and rockets at U.S. military bases and have also attacked the United Arab Emirates. The Houthis have carried out numerous missiles and drone attacks on critical Saudi Arabian and Emirati infrastructure, including on Aramco oil facilities, as well as the Abu Dhabi International Airport.
So that's what's going on. So this is, now the other situation is Gaza, of course. Israel has announced today, I think they've announced that they're pretty much done with the military capabilities of Hamas in the north, but they're now in the south near Khan Yunis. And then the question is, what are they going to do about the Rafah crossing there? That's that little circle along the border between Egypt and Gaza that's controlled by Egypt, where this is where a lot of the materials that Hamas has stolen over the years or shanghaied over the years to build these tunnels. And Gaza here, this is the most complex terror base that's ever been uncovered on planet Earth. There's 200 or more miles of tunnels there. Some are big enough to drive cars through, and some of them are big enough to drive cars through, and Israel didn't even know they were there. And Israel seems to be pretty capable in the area of intelligence, but they missed this one big time, and there's going to be a big investigation. There's going to be a lot of fallout from that. Maybe more about that in just a moment. And the front page of the London Times this morning, they've been uncovering computers in Gaza. They have some that they've uncovered because what happened was the leadership in Gaza has fled to the south. At least that's what's believed. They may have left, and Israel doesn't know. It's a very big world out there. And it seems to me that having driven across the United States and Canada a couple times over the past few years, it would seem that if you really want to get lost, there's a lot of space to do that in. Now, you can't have a cell phone and that type of thing. But so send more, and they were not using cell phones, it appears, in Hamas. But they were concerned about what was going to happen. They were concerned that Turkey seemed to be leaning towards Israel, and that may have been one of the reasons that they launched this attack. The other thing is happening at the International Court of Justice. South Africa, at least the South African government, has filed a application to have what Israel is doing in Gaza to be declared genocide. And in a different move than what's happened before, Israel's actually defending itself. And that's coming up for a hearing in the next month or so. So that'll be interesting to watch in light of a lot of the other things that are going on as well. And here's part of the application that South Africa made. And of course, they include this map about Gaza. By the way, I've seen videos of aid trucks coming in to Gaza and immediately being hijacked by Hamas. Because they don't really care about the people. They care about destroying Israel and fighting a war and that type of thing. This was an article in the Jerusalem Post last week. Palestinian evangelical says thousands of Gazans will convert to Christianity. He was interviewed by Joel Rosenberg on Joel Rosenberg's program, which I think runs on TBN. Let's hope he's right. I'm not sure that it is. And then this is David Ignatius at the Washington Post talking about the fact, this is about a week ago, Palestinians, and by the way, you understand that there are certain people that write in the mainstream press that have like direct pipelines to the government. David Ignatius at the Washington Post would be one of those guys. There's a guy who writes for Israeli publication named Barak Ravid, and he is often referred to as the Israeli White House stenographer. In other words, he just gets the information from the White House and writes it down. So when you read him, understand that that's where he's coming from, that he's sometimes pushing an agenda that our administration wants to push. Turkey, they also have thing. This was kind of an interesting thing that happened this week. There was on January 1st, there was a big thing there along the Bosporus near the Hagia Sophia, the largest church in Christendom that Erdogan is turning back into a mosque, and the Great Blue Mosque. They're within sight of each other there on the west side of the Bosporus in Istanbul. And so you can see there were a lot of people at this rally, and it's unusual because Erdogan didn't speak, his son spoke. So here's a video of his son speaking, and here's some of the things that he said. On October 7th, the Nazism of Israel, by the way, Erdogan's getting up there. He's a spry 69, he will be 70 the end of February, 2 days after me, but he's hanging in there. We're all just hanging in there at that age. On October 7th, the Nazism of Israel began one of the bloodiest massacres in history. We cannot be indifferent because, and this is where he starts lying. We cannot be indifferent because Jerusalem is our first direction of prayer and because the Al-Aqsa Mosque is our sacred house of worship. We cannot be indifferent because from Umar to Saladin to Salim the First, our ancestors who came before us watered this soil with the blood of martyrs and enabled the members of the tree, the Abrahamic tree, religions to live in tranquility in these lands. We know that those who are causing the genocide of Palestine are the same as those killers of our martyrs. We know that those who are creating artificial agendas and trying to divide us, who are trying to dilute the Palestinian cause, are the agents of influence of America and Israel. We know that breaking the fetters of Hagia Sophia under the leadership of our president was the first step. Remember when he did that? He went into this big ceremony and they unveiled, they sort of covered up Christian things in that church. He says, we know that the breaking the fetters of Hagia Sophia under the leadership of our president was the first step towards freedom for Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa. We promise that we will continue the boycott. Istanbul, promised to continue the boycott. This will not end with a ceasefire. For as long as the Palestinian cause continues, we are going to make room for the boycott in our lives. Very interesting speech. And so maybe he's being groomed. Now, I've not seen him speak before this. I've seen Erdogan, one of his daughters, speak and tweet about this issue, but not him. So, whoops, I'm going the wrong way. And so there's this, this is the guy named Ayuri, who was one of the leaders of Hamas, who was assassinated this week in Beirut on the third floor of an apartment building. They sent in, I've heard, about 6 missiles. And the strike was so precise that there were children sleeping in the room next door to where these 6 people were killed that were uninjured. This is what I'm told. And I know everybody's, you're just spewing propaganda. Daniel Pipes made a very interesting point about Gaza in a tweet this week. He went back to the New York Times from June 8th of 1967, and this is what the New York Times said at the time. Israel's swift capture of the Gaza Strip and rapid advance into Jordan has suddenly left her with the responsibility for many of the 900,000 refugees who fled 19 years ago from what is now Israel. So that's interesting, because the population now is what? 2.3 million, 2.2 million. And what's Israel accused of? Committing genocide on the Palestinians in Gaza for the last 50-some years. Well, how do you go from 900,000 to 2.2 million in the midst of a genocide? The math just doesn't work. And it talks about the relief agencies and all these other things. Old Jerusalem. It talks about the mix of Arabs in Israel's population. And that's changed. I mean, now there's 9 million living in Israel proper, not within the area of the West Bank. So the reservists, they've been sent home, but now they're told we got to go back to work. And the question is, what are they going to do? Is there going to be a ramping up? Is there going to be a war in Lebanon with Hezbollah? So this is a picture of the apartment building where this leader of Hamas was killed in Beirut. And so this is from Israel Alma, Israel-alma.org is the website. Sarat Zariv is the director of that, does a great job on analyzing this, showing where things happened in Beirut. This is a picture of a red flag being raised over the Jamkaran Mosque in Qum. That's the holy city in Iran. People say this is a signal that Iran's going to be exacting revenge. Nasrallah gave not one but 2 speeches this week, and I'll summarize them. Israel's bad. We're going to fight Israel. But they haven't really taken a lot of steps to do that. The other thing that happened, so right after the Hamas guy was killed in Beirut, Nasrallah gave one of his speeches. Then there was a bomb blast at a memorial near the grave of Qasem Soleimani. Soleimani was the guy who was assassinated 4 years ago at the Baghdad airport. He was the architect of the the Shia terror organization that's been developed by Iran over the years. And this is a picture of the funeral that took place. The Islamic State has come out and said, we did it. And of course, Iran has come out and said, well, the Islamic State in Israel and Zionism is the same thing. So it's Israel's fault. And they published a magazine thing about the architect. He's very revered. He's a martyr. And these are just pictures that I pulled off of Khomeini's website. And the thing that's a common theme in all of these is what? The Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. You see it in the patch on Soleimani's shoulder. You see this picture, the Dome of the Rock, which is kind of interesting because you see the ocean behind it. And I've been there and you don't really see the ocean behind the Dome of the Rock, even from the top of the Mount of Olives. And then again, you see the red that's used. And again, the Dome of the Rock is a theme in everything. So Hezbollah, in response to the assassination, they fired a big rocket barrage on the northern border of Israel. You can see over here on the left is Rosh Hanikra on the ocean. That's a grotto that's there on the border between Lebanon and Israel. Down to the south here, you see the city of Nahariya. And then you can see the Lebanese border, but that was a red alert that I pulled off. I think this happened Friday. There's apps that you can get. I used to have red alert, but now I have one. I can't remember the name of it. But it buzzes all the time with these attacks. And it was really buzzing on Thursday and Friday because Hezbollah was responding to the things that were going on. Now, supposedly they attacked a military base near a town in the Galilee called Meron, Mount Meron. If you remember a few years ago, that's where there was a stampede. Orthodox Jews were there worshiping at a tomb of a revered rabbi, and there was a stampede, and I think there were about 50 men and boys killed because they practiced separation of the sexes, and a couple hundred injured in that stampede. So there's supposedly an Israeli facility there, and people say, we bombed this, now Israel won't be able to attack anybody in Syria. And I'm going to say, I'm going to wait and see on that one because I don't think that that's going to be the case. This is a fairly typical picture, though, of what's going on along the northern border. This is a kibbutz about a mile from the Lebanon border. And what do you see? You don't see any people. So this is true along the border in the north and along the border along Gaza in the south. A couple 100,000 people. They're all living in hotels at government expense. They're not working their jobs. The reservists are not working their jobs. It's having a tremendous impact on the economy. Blinken, of course, is there in the Middle East. This is from the Turkish news today. This is an interesting article from the Financial Times yesterday. The edge of the abyss looms in the Middle East. So if you think I'm doom and gloom, look at what all the other people talk about. And so here's what they say. One can find relief in the fact that the 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah and previous U.S. and Israeli assassinations of even more important Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iranian leaders did not trigger broader conflict. But the difference now is context, scope, tempo, and perception. More senior leaders are being killed and more attacks of significance are being conducted across more theaters in a compressed period. Meanwhile, Israel's assault on Gaza continues, antagonizing the region's population. So what do they see? They see acceleration. They see convergence. All these things happening at once. The past 10 days, this editorial continues, show how close to the edge of the abyss the region is. There have been suspected killings by Israel, the top Iranian commander in Syria, and the deputy Hamas political leader in Lebanon, and by the U.S. of a senior Iranian-backed Iraqi commander. The apparent slide towards a U.S.-led intervention against the Houthis in Yemen could also be a sign of an acceleration. So there's a number of articles. I don't have time to go into them today. They're in the Jerusalem Post. Some of them, if you dig around, I might have a link to this one. This is by Seth Frantzman, a good article about the Abraham Accords amid the Gaza war. What's going to happen with them? And Seth rightly notes in the article, they're not going particularly well. So if you go to the Jerusalem Post website and you type in Seth Frantzman, Abraham Accords amid the Gaza war, you may find the article. It may be behind a paywall, I don't know. There's a number of articles. I'm not going to go through and read all of what Seth has written here, but this is the Abraham Accords was a big deal. Jared Kushner is still pushing them. And then here's some other articles in that Jerusalem Post magazine that was published on Friday. I was able to find several of the articles on the Jerusalem Post website, but I have a subscription, so I don't know if I'm able to find them because I have a subscription or not. But, for example, will the Gaza be inhabitable after the conflict? I mean, have you seen the pictures of the destruction there? It's not going to be inhabitable by people who want to live in a house, by and large. I mean, some estimates are that 50% of the buildings have been destroyed or rendered uninhabitable. So who knows? What's next for Gaza? A two-phase quagmire of chaos. An article by in the Jerusalem Post. The brewing political cyclone. There's a lot of conflict going on right now in Israel. The IDF has appointed a commission to study what happened on October 7th. The right-wing members of Netanyahu's coalition are objecting to that. Why don't you have any politicians involved? The IDF has appointed their own commission with people who may have been complicit in what happened on October 7th. And so it's not good for them to be investigating themselves without any oversight from us. And then Danny Gallant, a member of the War Cabinet, who I think if there was an election right now, he would have a very good chance of being the prime minister. He was saying, well, how dare you attack the IDF? I used to head the IDF. And to which I'm sure the discussion was, yeah, that's our point, Minister Gallant. You need to be investigated just like everybody else. Another article by Seth, From the Northern to Southern Border, An Unprecedented Challenge. Seth has been on the ground in Gaza. I don't know if he's heading up north soon. But this is a very unique time. Jewish outreach, here's an article. Jewish outreach to Christian allies is urgent. So here's this article in the Jerusalem Post, clashing over the Army probe. And he says, you're just doing a politically motivated attack on the IDF. And the people on the right are saying, well, you guys didn't do anything and you were hiding things from us so you could use it to attack us. This is a tweet Caroline Glick posted. I believe this is a retired general who was talking about Ehud Barak. And he sort of went through like, why are we having trouble? And what this looks like is what's happened in the United States with sort of the hollowing out of military equipment. General Brick says, Ehud Barak is responsible for the conception of a small army because the great wars are over. So Ehud Barak, this leftist, friend of Epstein, came out this week. He's leading the protests against, he doesn't like Netanyahu. He thinks he should be prime minister again. He was defense minister in one of the Netanyahu administrations, but he just said, listen, the great wars are over. We don't need all this equipment anymore. Sounds very much like the United States. The Cold War is over. Let's spend the peace dividend. And let's spend the peace dividend many, 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 many times over because, well, people will buy our bonds forever, I guess. Yalan cut 1,000 tanks in several divisions. Gantz cut 600 tanks. Kochavi cut 200 tanks. Eisenkot cut the artillery. I think he's one of the guys in the War Cabinet. Benny Gantz also took the weapons to the emergency rooms. Lapid, as finance minister, took Cobra Squadron planes and gave the Jordanians free for no money, as is translated from Hebrew. And then at the end, see this, add to this the left's war against the possession of weapons in the Jewish sector as a whole, which was going on long before Ben-Gvir ever came on the scene. He's the one they like to blame everything on. And by the way, the kibbutzes, there are a couple kibbutzes that did pretty well in the attack on October 7th because they took their security seriously. They had neighborhood watch groups, they had weapons, they had easy access to weapons. But other kibbutzes, So, well, we're at peace. What should we worry about? We shouldn't worry about these guys. And look, the Israeli government, including Netanyahu, says we can manage this situation. Well, it didn't really turn out too well. And this is what's going on in the West Bank, is this constant terror attacks. This is one that happened today, and the driver of the car was killed. Happens all the time. By the way, just as an aside, so here's Iraq, and there was an announcement article this week that said Iraq and China are investing $2 billion building 5 cities to house several 100,000 Iraqis, including one in the Babel governance. Everybody says, oh, see, they're building the ancient city of Babylon again. So I just say wait and see on that. I don't know if it's going to happen. It may happen. It may happen. I'm just saying is right now I don't see a lot of evidence of it. Certainly not the building like it's going on in Neom. Let me just talk briefly about artificial intelligence. This is what they're thinking about in our capital. They think in ones and zeros. They usually think in ones with lots and lots and lots of zeros after them, I think is the way they think in Washington. But this week, they're a week from tomorrow, Davos 2024 starts. So sometime this week, it's on the 10th or 11th, Davos has a big event, the World Economic Forum, and they will release their 2024 Global Risk Report. So I hope to report on that to you next Sunday. And then they have this, here it is, they'll be released on January 10th. And so this, I went and pulled off a little some stuff on artificial intelligence off of that strategic intelligence website. You can see how this is all kind of, you click on one thing and it highlights this and it brings up these articles. So that's strategic, I think it's strategic-intelligence.wforum.org or .com. You can find it, just Google it. So a lot of things there to be tracked. This is kind of interesting. Climate change is going to be a big deal. These reports are all over the place. They're not selling electric cars. The sales of them are falling. China now can produce like 3/4 of all the electric cars needed on the planet. They have that capacity. And so we're missing the green target. Well, we're missing the green target because they don't work that well. I read an article this week. Plant-based meat is not any better for you than real meat. And it has as much emissions associated with it as regular meat. So stay out of our kitchen, stay out of our refrigerators. Carbon credits, everybody's going after Africa. This is in the Switzerland, Europe this week. The European Digital Identity Wallet has been released. That's from November, and this is a Swiss website. The Federal Council is planning a new, secure, and free electronic identity. Just sign up for it. What could go wrong? Everything will be good. You will be happy. You might not own anything, but you'll still be happy because all of your needs are going to be met. I thought that was kind of an interesting graphic somebody used on artificial intelligence. They have, this is in California, they're rolling out a AI TV news network. So they'll be able to program the hosts as to what to say. But because only a few media companies own these TV stations, if you've ever seen the mashup that they do of a particular story, and the script in Sacramento is the same as the script in Dallas, is the script in Columbus, because it's all run by the same company. This is front page yesterday of the National Post in Canada. Artificial wombs are coming. I don't want one. You can have mine. This is a big thing on drones, or massive drone things. Go look at the drone videos from the United Arab Emirates celebration of the New Year. Thousands of drones in the air all doing things. And if those drones can be programmed to do patterns, they can be programmed to do multiple attacks. So this is a United States Lockheed Martin, a laser interceptor that they're looking at that they claim they're rolling out. Israel has one as well. Okay, let me just talk about this real quickly, because this is only a symptom of what's going on. This is what's going to happen worldwide. It happened in Brazil. It's happened in the United States. So the Colorado Supreme Court came out and said Trump can't be on the ballot. He engaged in an insurrection. It's now been appealed to the United States Supreme Court. They've agreed to take the case. I don't know when it's set for oral argument, but I believe the final briefs are due by February the 8th. I expect that they will have a oral argument and decision shortly after that. I don't see, I watched all these people talking about, oh, it's in the Constitution, Section 3 of Amendment 14, disqualification from holding office. No person shall be a senator, representative in Congress, or elector of the president and vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or any other state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress, as an officer of the United States, et cetera, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same. This was post-Civil War. But you notice what it says. No person shall be a senator, a representative, or elector, or hold any office under the United States. It doesn't mention the president specifically. So the argument is that the president's not prone to this. And the good argument that they have on the other side, there's about 5 or 6 arguments. The Supreme Court will have an easy time of it. It's like, to me, it's almost like fourth and an inch, and the other side as your back turned as you come up to the line. I think it's pretty easy. But there's no conviction of Trump for insurrection. That's kind of critical. And it says here, the Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. And guess what? Congress did enact a criminal statute. And so if there is an indictment, a trial, a guilty verdict, and the appeals run out and somebody's convicted of insurrection, then maybe the 14th Amendment would apply. But that's not here. Maine's done it. But here's the other thing. This is a graphic, a picture, editorial cartoon in the Washington Post yesterday of the people on the right who challenged the results of an event that occurred in November of 2020, and they should all be barred from office. So it doesn't stop with Trump. That's the point. It's going to cause a lot of chaos. This report was released by Democrats saying, hey, Trump's businesses got like $7 million from foreign governments. Okay, so what about the guy who's in the White House? Does anybody ever want to look at it? So the chairman of this committee is Jamie Raskin, who's a lunatic from California. Anyway, this is a series of couple editorials in the Financial Times over the past month. The West cannot hedge against Trump's return, and they're talking about how terrible this is going to be. It's just, he's engaged in all this thing. There can be little doubt that Trump 2.0 would pose an even greater threat to U.S. democracy than he did the last time. Yet issuing the same warning to Americans again and again is not having the desired effect. There are grounds to believe that it never will. If someone refuses to eat their spinach, it does no good to shout ever more loudly about how healthy it is. By the way, I did see an article this week. I don't know if this was an ad. These health things come in, they're sort of disguised as ads, but it said that kale is very unhealthy for you. And I think it is, because it makes you sick if you eat it. So the president of Harvard resigned. She quit. Interesting, this is sort of, it used to be Veritas Harvard, now it's sorta-tas Harvard. And this came about, Christopher Rufo led the charge on this, and Christopher Rufo, who's written a lot on DEI and ESG, critical race theory, woke universities, corporations, that type of thing. I can't remember where I read the article. It might have been a Politico or someplace. Said, he did a really good job in that what he did was now everybody's going and reading what these leftist professors have been writing in their PhD dissertations, because they're trying to see if they plagiarized anything, but they're going to find out all the ideas that got them to the position that they're at. So, and then migration everywhere. And then I will finish with this. He vetoed the legislation a week ago that would have prohibited drug therapy and surgery on minors to change their gender. Because, we got to prevent people from, we got to respect what the parents want to do with these kids. And I saw this video of these people from University of Cincinnati Children's Hospital, green hair and all this stuff, talk about, we're going to hide this from the parents. They're really just caregivers anyway. They really shouldn't have any say. So this week he issued regulations. Here's just a little clip of his. He issued regulations, which I don't even know if he has the constitutional authority to do, to prevent, he could have just let the legislation go through, let people challenge it. Here's what he said.
A week has gone on by, and I still feel just as firmly about that as I did that day. I believe that parents, not the government, should be making these very crucial medical decisions for the children. At that time, I also said that there are things we need to do to further protect children and adults. And some of these things that I announced that we needed to do go well beyond what is in House Bill 68.
Okay.
So 1 week later, I'm here to report.
When a country falls into rebellion against God's principles, you get the leaders you deserve. Mike DeWine is an example of that. Governor, it would be great if you just resigned, went back to Cedarville or wherever your retirement home is and collect your federal and state pensions and leave us alone. Because you were duped on this one. You were shanghaied by radical gender activists. And so you can come in and say, well, look, I stopped surgery. Listen, the hormone therapy is just as bad. And so just please go away. I think it's time. But listen, we're under the judgment of God. I don't think there's any question about that. So listen, you're going to see this acceleration. You're going to see this convergence. You're going to see things that happen. It's like, why are these people doing this? And they're people who've lost the spiritual battle. There's just no other question, no other way to say it. So I could go on for a while, but that's enough. So appreciate your prayers. Pray that my PowerPoint will be healed. And I have no idea what's going on. So let's pray. Lord, thanks so much for your word. We appreciate the fact that you've given us this glorious gospel of Jesus Christ. As we've been studying Acts over the past year, we see these messages by the early Christian leaders that talk about almost consistently this coming judgment and the need to repent and accept the gospel of Jesus Christ. Pray that we will take that to heart, share the gospel with those around us, and bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.